In this example, we're going to discuss what a data type is in FlowWright, and we're going to go ahead and build a custom data type and configure it and use it within one of our steps. So let's go ahead and open one of our FlowWright processes. Let's go to this process definition that I have called generate PDF form. And I'm going to drag one of these, let's say a decision step. And on this decision step, you can see we have some inputs. We have a condition to evaluate. And data type is what renders the control for this particular input. And we have various different data types. If you look at some of our other steps, for example, if I click on generate barcode step, we have various different data types here, which is where in this case we're using the text control or the string data type. And here you can see we have a couple of drop down data types and various controls here. So if you go to administration section, we can look at those data types. So for example, if I go into administration, this will give you a list of all the data types. So if you want to look at the string data type, I can go ahead and look at the string and say render it, and you'll be able to see what that data types renders as. We can also go to a certain step. So for example, let's go to administration and steps, and let's take one of our steps, let's say from the database step. And let's take the store file into DB. If you go to the metadata of that step, you can see a bunch of inputs. And you can also see against each input, we have a data type. So in this case, we have string. Here we have select yes, no. And here we have string, string. So for the path to the file input, it's going to display a text box. For this remove file, it's going to select yes, no, either a drop down or a switch control for you to select yes or no. So depending on the data type that's configured, it's going to render a certain way based on how that data type is built. So now let's go ahead and build a custom data type. So in this case, I am going to go ahead and go to my Visual Studio, and let's create a new project. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and pick, I want to do a library, because our data type really, sits inside, a library DLL. So we're going to build this in .NET Standard. So I'm going to say next, and I'm going to put, let's say, example data type, and say next. And instead of .NET 6, we'll just build it on .NET Standard, and say create. All right, so we have this example data type namespace, and I'm going to call this CLS example data type. Okay, and I'm going to also add the FlowWright NuGet package to this. So let me go into NuGet. Let's browse for FlowWright. And let's add that package. Once the package is all added, now we can go and start building. So let's just compile to make sure everything compiles out of the box here with the code we have. We really don't have much. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to implement one of our iData type interfaces. And by default, it's not going to find it. So I'm going to go ahead and say using our using statement, FlowWright decision engine. And it will still give you an error here because we have to implement the interface. So I'm going to go ahead and say implement interface. And as you can see, we have to implement the render method. The render method also has a data type context that gets passed in, and it returns a string. And this string is basically HTML telling what to render when this data type is displayed. So for example, what we're going to do is we're going to give this data type just return a text box. So I'm going to take some code that I have here, which basically builds a HTML string of a text box. This is actually the real code from the string data type. As you can see, I'm building this variable as HTML. Input name is going to be data type control ID, and type is text. Value is, you can also provide a value here, which is O-engine context. Actually, there is that data type context dot default value if you have a value, or you can also provide selected value. And then you can also give an ID which is same as the control ID, and say next. All you have to do is say return as HTML, and that's it. That's all you have to do in order to build a data type controller. And let's go ahead and compile this to make sure it builds. So compilation is good. Now what we can do is we can go and configure this. The easiest way to configure this is if you're working with FlowWright, you want to make sure that you have a developer copy of FlowWright running on your own machine, because you will be, doing these kind of operations in order to update FlowWright. So here I'm going to go ahead and grab my DLL that I just built. So I'm just going to go into open the folder. And this is kind of the quicker way for developers to do this. So you can see I have built my DLL. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this DLL to my FlowWright directory. So if I go to my initpub, and if I go to www.root, see the workflow, and let's go to the bin directory. I'm going to put my file over here. And if you're debugging, it's also better to put the debug version of the DLL and the PDB version. And now I'm just going to go to my FlowWright and just reload FlowWright. Since I put a new DLL into the bin directory, this is going to take some time for it to load. So we'll continue once this loads. So in order to configure the DLL that we just placed in the bin directory for the data type, we're going to go into administration, and we're going to go into data types. And we have a built-in auto detect feature. So we're going to use that feature. So we're going to say auto detect. This will automatically pick up any new data types that we have placed in the bin folder. So you can see my CLS example data type came up. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and say configure. This will auto configure that particular one for us. And if I go back to my data types list, we should see our example. And I can actually click on this and I can go ahead and say render, and we should see the text box for it. We can also add this to an existing step, and look at this. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back to administration and steps. And let's take our decision step. I'm just going to take a well-known step like the decision. And we'll go ahead and add a new input into this step. So I'm going to say add new input, and the input name is, let's say, info. And I'm going to put description as store information. And I'm going to select my example, CLS example data type that I just created. So let's see, we should have this CLS example data type. And I can also provide a default value if I want. I can also say required. So I'm just going to say add. Now you can see we have a new input. And let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to go to my process definitions now. And let's go to one of these forms. And let me drag a decision step. And if I click on this decision step, I can see my normal fields. But if I go to my advanced tab, I can see a new input, and it's called store information. And my custom data type that I just built is being used on this step input to render. So hope you learned how to build a custom data type using in this video. Thank you.